Please welcome the founder and CEO of Together International, Diego Mariscal.
Super excited to be here. When they asked me to speak about my work and what I was doing, I did not realize it was going to be in the main stage. So I'm a little more nervous than usual, but hopefully you won't be able to tell. So as a visual description of who I am, so I am a 30-year-old in a wheelchair, wearing red shoes and a red backpack. And if you see me walking, you'll see me with red crutches. So I try to make them all match. But I'm really excited to be here. I feel like today's a full circle moment because I was actually an intern for the US ICD cohort. And Dan, who has been MC and coordinating a lot of things, was an intern with me. We were actually roommates in the program. And so it feels like a full circle moment to be back here. So very excited. So I'll start by talking a little bit about my own personal story, and then I'll jump into what that means for the international arena of our work. And then I'll move into Q&A so that we can make this a more interactive conversation. So my journey began actually in Monterrey, Mexico. I was born in the States. My parents, who are both Mexicans, were shopping, and I was born 6 months and a half into my mom's pregnancy. She jokes and says that I've always been really stubborn. Even before I was born, I wanted to get out quickly. And as a result of me being born prematurely, I developed cerebral palsy. And growing up, what was really interesting, growing up in Monterrey, Mexico, because that's where my parents were originally from, I had a brother who didn't have a disability. And he was only 10 months and a half younger than me, so not even a year. And that was a really important part of my upbringing because my parents actually set up the same level of expectations for me and my brother. Meaning, if he had to make his bed in the morning, that meant I had to make my bed in the morning as well. If he had to help set the table, I had to do that also. And sometimes that meant, helping with plastic, silverware or cups, or that meant waking up earlier to make my bed in the morning. But the same level of expectation was placed, high expectation for me and my brother. Also, a really important part of my upbringing was the fact that I grew up in Monterrey, Mexico, which continues to be a very entrepreneurial town. It's sort of the Silicon Valley of Mexico. And so that component and really looking at how is entrepreneurship a source not only for wealth creation, but for social innovation, social inclusion, what was and is an important foundation of the work that I continue to do today. And so when I came to DC, I thought I was going to do international relations and work in the policy space. But I quickly realized that there weren't enough people talking about disability and entrepreneurship. And because I had grown up in Mexico, Monterrey, Mexico, sort of exposed to entrepreneurs at a very early age, and also I had built businesses since I was earlier than high school, I had experience understanding that ecosystem and looking at how is disability a competitive advantage for business seemed like a natural fit and sort of a white space of the work that I was interested in doing, and frankly, work that a lot of conversations today have been around employment and employment of people with disabilities. But at the same time, disabled people are twice as likely to be entrepreneurial, right? Because we have to be just to create jobs that fit our needs. And also, as disabled people, we have to figure out how do we get dressed, how we drive, how we communicate. And so using that skill sets and those skills that we develop as disabled people can be a catalyst for change and for innovation. And that's been proven. If you look at Richard Branson, Elon Musk, and all the other entrepreneurs in Shark Tank, or investors in Shark Tank, they've come out to say that they have a disability, but that tends to happen after they become rich and famous. So the vision of Together International and my work has been, how do we actually support people and create transformative change before that? Because imagine what that would mean if we were investing in those people, in disabled people, before they become rich and famous, what that would mean from an education standpoint, from a policy standpoint, from a system advocacy standpoint. And so my work along the past decade really has focused around how do we create those resources. And what that looks like now is Together International has become the largest accelerator for founders with disabilities. We support more than 700 entrepreneurs from all around the world through our various different programs. And collectively, we've helped those entrepreneurs raise more than $70 million in various forms of capital, whether that be investment, sales, acquisitions, et cetera, et cetera. And what I'm extremely excited to talk about today, and I'll get into it in a second, is this partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank that will focus on taking our work and our model and really looking at how are we implementing those learnings specifically in Latin America. So I'll move forward with the presentation. So here's a little bit about my story, which I've mentioned. I grew up in Monterrey, Mexico, really looking at disability as a competitive advantage. Specifically in Latin America, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but a lot of people know that disability is the largest minority in the world, that as people are growing older, we're also seeing an increase in the number of people with disabilities. And so there's a real opportunity to create change there. Who are people with disabilities? Well, we look at disability from an identity perspective, from a variety of different perspectives, really looking at the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities when we look at international definition of folks with disabilities. The intersection of disability and poverty, this is, I'm sure, not news to many of you all, but really looking at disability and poverty have gone hand in hand, and really entrepreneurship can be a solution to sort of combat this statistic that is not just true in the States or in Latin America, but really across the world. Missed opportunity for innovating. Last night a bunch of us were having dinner, and many people were mentioning how the keyboard, audiobooks, the internet, the electronic toothbrush, and other technology. I think Jessica in the panel before me was talking about blurring backgrounds for Zoom, which we all use. Were all developed because of a need of the disability market or by disabled entrepreneurs. And so we've been always sort of at the forefront of innovation out of necessity. And that really has not been recognized primarily in the entrepreneurship ecosystem and entrepreneurship support. And that's what we're hoping to solve. Transforming the lives of millions of people with disabilities in Latin America and the Caribbean through the Ecosistema Diverso project. That's the project that we're partnering with IDB on. The project really looks at how are we creating an ecosystem that supports entrepreneurs with disabilities holistically. I'll talk about the different pillars in just a second. Why is it innovative? Really, I think many of us in this room understand that this type of work and this type of innovation requires the village, right? We're all here because we're all looking at inclusion from various different sectors, whether it be the employment sector, the policy sector, the corporate sector. And so really looking at how is it that we're creating a holistic ecosystem, because if you look at also opportunities in the marketplace, we see that competitors, I'm using this as a metaphor, as an example, but competitors actually do better when they're in close proximity of each other. So that's why when you see a Starbucks, you tend to see another sort of coffee shop nearby, or a McDonald's, and there may be a Burger King nearby, because that just opens up the opportunity in the market, and people start to, I guess, traditional wisdom might see that when you see a competitor, that might be a negative thing. But in fact, when we look at it from an ecosystem perspective, it widens the opportunity, it widens the market. And that's why we look at our work from an ecosystem standpoint. So the components of the project, and this again, are based on components that we have proven primarily in the US, but really looking at identifying entrepreneurs and identifying startups, then taking them through a pipeline of training, development skills, connections, incubation, so really taking an idea and moving that idea into an actual concept, into traction, sales, et cetera. Then moving into the accelerator program, and most importantly for many entrepreneurs and business owners, access to capital and connecting them with investors, et cetera, et cetera. This is not necessarily a linear process, meaning they don't have to start in the beginning. Depending on where businesses are in their life cycle, they might benefit from one or more of these stages. But this sort of gives you a sense of the breadth of services that we offer as an organization, both in the US and internationally now. So this is really important, the alignment of this type of project and this type of initiative at a global scale. There was talks earlier about potentially doing this conference in South America next year, and I think it really highlights how it's critical to look at disability inclusion and specifically entrepreneurship inclusion in a global stage. The other big component that I haven't talked about is a research component. So I threw a lot of numbers, a lot of sort of impact, direct technical assistance, but there hasn't been a deep dive investigation of what are the different barriers specific to entrepreneurs with disabilities. There was a project and a report that ODIP did years ago on startup grants, looking at the barriers that entrepreneurs with disabilities face and what type of services they need. But that was really statewide specifically. There hasn't really been a investigation in Latin America, and so that's one of the things that we're proud to be pioneering in this region. And this is, again, based on a model that we've looked at in the States as well. And so we hope that this component will continue to compound and impact more regions globally. The beneficiary of this project, so we're looking to support 600 entrepreneurs with disabilities across the region, 200 per year, more or less, through our various different programs. And also looking at engaging public policy stakeholders, venture capitalists, and other sort of ecosystem builders. I've mentioned, I lead Together International, and what is interesting about this work, and I'll go back to kind of my origin story in the beginning, was that my relationship specifically with the Inter-American Development Bank started when I was an intern 10 years ago through Use It. And that relationship has grown and developed over time to now this multi-million-dollar project impacting hundreds of people in the region. And so I share that with you now because we think about these sort of wins as cornerstones of progress, et cetera. But it really has been 10 years in the making, this relationship that has continued to develop from an intern level now to an executing partner of this project. And so my encouragement to you all, especially the young people in this room, is to really think about your trajectory as an advocate or as a person who wants to create impact in a long-term vision. This was kind of 10 years in the making, and now super proud to continue to compound on the impact that we're making. A little bit about our board of directors: diverse entrepreneurs, folks in the entrepreneurship space. This has been a great year for us, and so we're highlighting some of our partners here. But again, this has really shown how it's an ecosystem approach. And this sort of rounds it out with my story, but really looking at how do we recognize disability as a competitive advantage and transform the lives of millions of people with disabilities, not just in Latin America, but globally. So, and highlighting some success stories. I saw Tiffany here earlier, super excited about the work that she's doing as a disabled entrepreneur herself. I know she's supporting, also as an investor, other entrepreneurs. And it's really exciting to see how many of us have been able to take our disability and really utilize it as a source of innovation and creativity. And so I'm sure that hopefully next year or and the year after, I'll be able to share many more success stories, not just in Latin America and the Caribbean, but around the world through many different partnerships. I think that's our slides. I'll go back to the beginning. There we go. But again, what I want to emphasize through this project and through this conversation is the power of network, the power of community, and the power of disability as a source of innovation and creativity. And so my challenge to you all as you leave today, and I want to make sure I leave time for questions, but as you leave here today, really thinking about how is it to coin Special Advisor Mankara, who was speaking earlier, how is it that the world, that the field that you're working on is including people with disabilities, not from a nice to have or even from an equity lens to have, but from a competitive advantage perspective? How is disability a source of innovation, creativity, and how is it that we are tapping into that source to make our world more inclusive and accessible for all? Because as we've seen and as we've heard many of us speak here today, if we invest in founders with disabilities, if we invest in the disability community systematically, we create a world and an ecosystem that is better and more inclusive for everybody. So thank you. Short and sweet, but I would love to open it up for questions. Yeah, I cannot see because I have blinding lights, so I will rely on, there we go, perfect.
Hi, my name is Amy Aberonoff, and I am an entrepreneur. I worked in academia for many years, and so trying to figure out my space as a disabled entrepreneur has been somewhat of a challenge. And so I'm wondering, this is the first time that I've interacted with other disabled entrepreneurs in a space, but it doesn't feel that there's like a conference or a space for us. And so I'm wondering if your company has something, annual conference or a space for disabled entrepreneurs to come together and share best practices, because starting a business has been really difficult?
Absolutely. So short answer is yes. We have one of the 5 pillars that you saw there that was sort of identifying entrepreneurs and bringing them together. We have a program called the Get Together platform, and it's exactly what you're saying. It's a community. It's virtual. Most of our programs are actually virtual to make it more accessible for people, right? To avoid barriers of physical infrastructure, to make it easier to have access to interpreters, captions, et cetera, et cetera. Part of this project specifically looks at how do we do in-person summits in the region. And so we'll be doing at least one summit each year. This is a 3-year project. So we'll be doing one summit a year in the Latin America region. And I'm sure we'll be taking learnings and lessons from that and thinking about how do we actually bring that back to the States. So it's a really interesting idea because we've taken a model that has been successful in the States, based that in our work in Latin America, and then we're able to bring learnings back. So it's an ever-evolving cycle. But short answer is yes, there is. It's online right now, and so happy to talk to you after about how to get you plugged in there. Yes. Oh, we may need a mic for the interpreters. Give me one.
Hi, over here on the right. My name is James.
We'll get to you in a second.
As a business owner with a disability, do you have any advice for avoiding or getting out of the mindset of doing twice the work for the same result? Over the last decade, I've worked for a number of different companies, and I don't know if it's just like an internal thing or if it's across the board, but feeling like you have to always outperform or do twice the work just to sort of avoid your disability becoming a part of the conversation when it comes to your performance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So 2 things. One, which I think is the most sort of impactful, is thinking about reframing that and really thinking about how is disability a competitive advantage in your field, right? And how can you reposition that? For example, for me, I have cerebral palsy. Most of the times I use crutches. For big conferences like this, I like to bring my chair. But I have literally fallen thousands of times. And thousands of times I've gotten back up. And so when I go into a pitch meeting or when I go into a conversation with one of our partners or investors, my pitch to them is I'm going to be successful because I have we talk about in businesses, it doesn't matter how many times you fall, it matters how many times you get back up. I have literally fallen thousands of times, and thousands of times I've gotten back up. So you're better off betting in me and somebody like me because we are more equipped to deal with setbacks and being creative and resiliency. So how do you reposition because I agree, living with a disability can oftentimes be a full-time job in and of itself. So how do you reposition that to say, this is actually contributing to me being able to do my job better? And the second part to your question would be thinking about disability as an opportunity market. For example, I'm sure you'll hear conversations in this conference, if not already, about ABLE accounts. And many people talk about ABLE accounts as savings accounts that you can put that prevent you from losing benefits, right? If you put money into an ABLE account, that doesn't count towards your benefits for SSI, SSDI, Medicaid. What a lot of people don't talk about is ABLE accounts can also be investments accounts. And you can put up to $32,000 into those ABLE accounts that if they compound over time with an 8%, average compound interest rate, that gets up to $3 million in 3 years, right? We talk about health disparity and health equity, right? And that's a vehicle where generational wealth can be quote unquote solved within one generation. Not everybody's gonna be able to save $32,000 per year, but the idea is there. And so the more that we can talk about the disability work from a gains perspective, from an opportunity perspective, the better the industry as a whole is gonna be able to grow.
Okay.
Hopefully that's helpful.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Watansky. I'm fluent in Spanish, and I have two questions for you. One is, what can the West and the US learn from Latin American disabled entrepreneurs? And also, how do we look at the challenges of Latin American entrepreneurs within the broader context of the political and economic and social challenges facing Latin America, which are obviously specific to each individual country?
Loaded questions. So first question was, I'm repeating it for myself, so make sure that I got the question right. First question was, what can we learn from the Latin America region? What can the US and the Western world learn about from the Latin America region? I would say somebody that has lived both cultures and both experiences. It's really interesting to see the US particularly is very much an individualized culture, right? We have the independent living movement, sort of as a community, as a culture, we're very much individualistic centric. And that has led to some really great things like ADA, like accommodations, and really pushing for independence. In Mexico and other Latin American cultures, it's much more of a collective. Disability and other type of issues become a family endeavor, right? A family initiative. And that is interesting because it can be, as somebody that has experienced both cultures, can be less isolating, right? Because you have this nucleus of people that are sort of experiencing the disability experience with you. But at the same time, it can lead to more of a protectionism approach and less of a sense of independence. By saying this, I'm hopefully illustrating that not one is better than the other. It's just different models of approaching disability. And when we understand that disability and disability inclusion is very much rooted in culture competencies and how the ecosystem views disability. And that's why this whole reframing of disability as a competitive advantage is so critical. Because if we start to change the way culture perceives this disability, that leads to very important systems change. So to answer your question, the lesson there would be understanding the cultural nuances and the cultural influences that society has in how we talk about disability, how we shape culture, how we shape policies. And the second part of your question, which is the hardest part, is how is the political climate and all the different things that are happening going to impact that? And I think what I would say to that would be, in the US, we're also going through some difficult political changes right now. And somebody else was saying earlier, the good thing about disability is that it affects everybody and it's a natural part of the human experience. So in many ways, it's a non-political issue, right? And so, again, it matters how we frame it and how we talk about disability. If there's an administration that prioritizes, entrepreneurship over human rights issues or social justice issues, well, there's a lens to which we can talk about disability from an entrepreneurship perspective, from an innovation perspective, that also intersects human rights issues and social issues, but it's understanding what's the right lens in which we need to talk about disability and how do we make it a part of every conversation.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Hi, Diego. It's me, Felicity.
Hello. So can I share our story? Can I share how we know each other?
Yes, you can.
So Spencer, Felicity's brother, was actually my very first intern years ago. And so I am really glad that you're here and that we go way back. So just wanted to give a plug. Hopefully he's watching the live stream and he knows he got a shout out.
He's on his way to Mexico
Oh,
now. So
God, maybe not.
But it's been 10 years since you guys first met. So my question
Yes.
for you is, what has growth looked like for you in your organization, and what was the process of scaling?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish he was here so he could share that journey. I mean, when we started, so I've always been really interested on how we change the way people think about disability. And that nugget or that interest came from actually participating in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and seeing, when I was a freshman in college, seeing how everybody there was sort of unapologetically proud of their disability, and people from all countries and, at the UN. And I said, how can we bring that to the States so that not only the select few that get to go to the UN experience this moment of pride? And what I thought about originally, and this was when Spencer and I were working together, was workshops in schools. And so we would do workshops and we would do things. I had done a similar business of doing simulations. So we would do things like eating without being able to see, or using public transportation in a wheelchair, things like that. And as a way to sort of educate people in Mexico about disability and disability rights, and people that hadn't been exposed to disability. And so I thought about doing something similar in Mexico when I first came. In the US when I first came. And that didn't really work for cultural reasons, right? The US was way far advanced than Mexico was in terms of disability inclusion. And that's my point of really understanding the cultural nuances of where you're trying to do the work, so that you understand the approach that you need to take in order to move the agenda forward. And so that was the first iteration, workshops in schools. Then, and that was when I was working with Spencer. And then we moved into advocacy campaigns and really empowering disabled people directly to do advocacy campaigns. And then from the advocacy campaigns, we moved into entrepreneurship specifically, and that's really where it took off. And so I often joke that Together International has been the 10-year overnight success, because it's taken multiple iterations to really think about what's our white space, what's the contribution that we can have. But in that pivot, what's interesting about that pivot is that the core mission of our work has never wavered, which is changing the way people think about disability.
Hi, Diego. It's really refreshing to hear someone who's really passionate about entrepreneurship. I come from over, you can probably tell by my accent, I come from over the pond in the United Kingdom. I run a supported employment agency, which mainly, our candidates are mainly people with learning disabilities and people with severe and enduring mental health needs. I've always been passionate about allowing our candidates to actually become entrepreneurs. And in 2017, I started a program where we managed to get people to be starting the entrepreneurship journey. We've been blown away by the types of businesses people have come to. What is slightly depressing, though, is still this lack of belief that a person can start their own business. And in the sector, we still get employment consultants saying, well, if he can do all that or she can do all that, then she could be employed, rather than being an entrepreneurship. So my slight question to you is, how do we, I think you're part of the answer, but how do we raise that aspiration to say that any person with a disability who wants to be an entrepreneur can and should be?
Yeah. So I'll share that you're facing a very similar problem than we do in the States. I think we were talking last night about how many VR counselors, vocational rehabilitation counselors, are actually supposed to be working on self-employment cases and we're actually encouraged, but they do the exact same thing that you're talking about, right? They don't know about self-employment, and so they sort of move people to traditional employment options. And so I share that because, and I'll share a story too. I was working with VR. I was a client of VR, and I'm a client of VR, but this was years ago. And my counselor knew that I was interested in entrepreneurship and self-employment, and he sent me resources, and he was very excited. He was like, check out these resources, these organizations. They're doing amazing things to support entrepreneurs with disabilities. What the counselor didn't realize is that he was sending me resources to my own organization. And so many times, I share this story because hopefully that illustrates that many times the problem is not with the people themselves, but actually with the systems. In that particular case, the counselor had no idea about entrepreneurship research and didn't even take the time to realize and to make the connection that, you know, the resources that he was sending was my own organization. And so, and that speaks to a broader context of lack of education for these providers, burnout, you know, antiquated policies. So what I would encourage you to look at is what is the system, to go back to this sort of ecosystem approach. What is the system that is leading to those results? Because it's not one person, it's not the person with a disability, it's not necessarily even the counselor, it's the whole ecosystem that is contributing to those outcomes. And so how do we look at an ecosystem approach too? And a solution to that would be, okay, so then bring entrepreneurs with disabilities who have been successful, who can train the counselors, move away from this traditional sort of hourly rate-based project and say, okay, instead of doing an hour or a case basis, do a whole ecosystem approach, you know, results-oriented approach, et cetera, because as long as we keep thinking, to the other point that was talked about earlier, as long as we keep thinking in terms of small, in terms of hours, in terms of clients served, in terms of, you know, restrictions within their own policy systems that exist, we're not going to be able to make transformative changes. Okay, so I see that I have 4 minutes left, and I don't, unless there's somebody else that has a question, but I do want to, today is a very special day, and I do want to mention that, not just because we're all here, but a really important person that was instrumental in my life was a woman, and many of you may know who she is, Judith Heumann. She was an incredible, incredible advocate. What she's often referred to as the mother of the disability rights movement. And for the last 8 years of her life, we would speak almost every morning or every night. We had a very, very special relationship. I called her my second mom. And what's super interesting is that when she passed away, I had the opportunity to be on stage and talk about her and her legacy. And today is the anniversary of her birthday. So I'm super excited to be in the stage, to be talking to you all. And I just really wanted to give her a shout out because she was a very important person in my life. And I know she would be really excited that we're all here celebrating this incredible movement. So thank you all.
Please enjoy your lunch. The next keynote will begin at 1 p.m. in the Grand Ballroom.